Hello, hello, and welcome once again to the David Messiah YouTube channel, where our watchwords are to teach and to build back up the kingdom of Zion. The title of this talk is Redefining Armageddon. Redefining Armageddon. And it is a sort of a continuation of an earlier recent video upload entitled Armageddon versus Esau. And what I want to do now is to sort of expound further as to that, from the angle precisely of what the subject title of this talk says, redefining Armageddon. How do you define Armageddon? And what really does it mean? Let me go to scripture where the word Armageddon in the King James occurs once and only once. So it is hard to have the Bible sort of serve as a source unto itself for defining the term Armageddon. It's their reference in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, verse 16. And here is what it says. Revelation chapter 16, and there in verse 16 it says, and he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And look at this, if we do a search on Armageddon, it says it occurs in one verse in the King James, Revelation 16:16. And in the way it occurs, you cannot figure out what it really means, isn't it? Okay, so we have to use other kinds of means to arrive at what the real meaning is of the word Armageddon. Now, there's also a sort of a cognate word that occurs also in the King James quite a few more times once you start to understand how Hebrew works. There's a word Megiddo, and that occurs in 11 verses. The king of Megiddo. So Megiddo is a place. And Megiddo and Armageddon are cognate, because Megiddo is, as I explained in the previous upload to which I've already referred, it's Armageddon, really. So it's the people of Gededi, the Gededi people, which, as I've already broken down, is a reference to the people of King David. So Megiddo is a place named after the people of King David. But in the way this Megiddo occurs, again, you cannot sort of obtain a definition from the text, as it were. You have to know the Hebrew to understand what it means. Which brings to mind the book of Zephaniah, chapter 3, verse 9, where we see, "For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of Yahweh to serve him with one consent." And that has been part of my task on this channel and in the book that is a sort of foundation text for this channel, the coming of David Messiah, to return to us the true name of the Most High. That was one of the major topics of chapter 3 of that book, from which we know it is Yahweh. So one has to go back to earlier kinds of concepts to get to this pure language. And we need to get to the pure language. We need to go back to the Paleo-Hebrew, which is a consonantal language, a pictographic language, in which every consonant has associated with it a pictograph, and the pictograph in itself is a carrier of meaning. So when you see the pictographs, you can put together the meaning. Now, it's not a precise science, but this is a point of Urim and Thummim of the possibilities that are then opened up as to what a word might mean. You go to Urim and you get guidance from Spirit as to which is the one that applies to that word, you see. And it's interesting that verse 10, following verse 9, is, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering." Beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, which is pointing to the Bantu people there in sub-Saharan Africa. And those Bantu languages are daughter languages of Paleo-Hebrew. So part of what is involved in restoring that pure language is to use the Bantu languages, which survive, obviously, and are daughter languages of Paleo-Hebrew, to get back at some of the meaning that was lost of that original Paleo-Hebrew. And before I go further, let me also go to the book of Jubilees, from where we get the notion that Hebrew was the original language of the garden. That's what it says explicitly here in the book of Jubilees, chapter 12. You go to verse 25 to 27, and let me read. "And Yahweh Almighty, Yahweh, said, Open his mouth and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth, with the language which has been revealed." Now, this is a reference to Abram, or Abraham, as his name was after it was changed. "For it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow of Babel." And verse 26, "And I opened his mouth and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in Hebrew, in the tongue of the creation." This is letting you know that Hebrew was that language spoken by Ada and Ama, portmanteau word Adam, of Ada and Ama, who were there in the garden. Hebrew is the tongue of the creation. Now, some will say, well, it is Sumerian, because they haven't found any tablets in any written language older than what they have found so far in Sumer, in that Mesopotamian region. But you can go with that if you like. I go with the book. And in the book it says Hebrew is the tongue of the creation, the language of the creation. And verse 27, "And he took the books of his fathers, and these were written in Hebrew, and he transcribed them, and he began from henceforth to study them. And I made known to him that which he could not understand, and he studied them during the 6 rainy months." So here was Abram, And he was then later on surnamed the Hebrew, Abram the Hebrew, because it was through him that the language of the garden, the language of creation, was restored. So that there is a, so I'm sort of adverting to a kind of a methodology to go along with what I just read from here in Zephaniah, verse 9. For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of Yahweh to serve him with one consent. Well, if he could do that with Abram after that language had been lost after the Tower of Babel incident or event, and restore it to Abram, then it can be done again. But what this verse also implies is that that so-called Hebrew, which has been supposedly preserved by the so-called Jews, is not a pure language. They have messed with the Hebrew, and they're foisting upon us a so-called modern Hebrew, where they have taken out that which is inconvenient. Because who are they? They are the ones who would be the robbers of our people. Daniel chapter 11, verse 14. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. And here is the relevant part. Also the robbers of thy people. The robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. This is adverting here to the imposture by which the so-called Jews would claim for themselves that inheritance that is rather due to the Negro Bantu as being the bloodline descendants of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And this is what we see also in Revelation chapter 2, verse 9. Bear with me, some of this is old hat to most of you, I would imagine. But I'm trying to when I say redefining Armageddon, I mean it in the specific in terms of how that word itself has been redefined, and I'm coming to that. But I also mean it in the general, in terms of redefining our language. And here is a reference here to those who call themselves Jews, but who are not. Verse 9, I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. This is now referring here to the Negro Bantu. We are poor, but we are also rich. Why are we rich? Because this world is our inheritance. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Indeed, it is a blasphemy for them who are the robbers of our people, the identity thieves. And it is not me saying it, this I'm reading here from the book. It is a blasphemy for them to claim to be the original children of the line of Abram, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah when they are not. You understand? And there we go also in Revelation chapter 3, verse 9. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. I didn't write it. I'm just reading what the book says. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. The reference here is to the Negro Bantu, the suppliants from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, beyond the rivers of Cush, which is a direct allusion to the Negro Bantu people, whose language is Paleo Hebrew, various dialects thereof. So the daughter languages of the Paleo Hebrew. He's going to make the impostors come and worship before our feet. I didn't write that. And it is backed up by what we have just been reading in the book of Zephaniah, chapter 3, where it is already referred by implication to the Negro Bantu from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, rivers of Cush, my suppliant, even the daughter of my dispersed. He said, the Negro Bantu, who shall bring mine offering? But first we have to wake up to the realization that in fact we are that people. The Negro Bantu people are that people who are bloodline descended from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and in large part also Judah. And it does, let me read 11. In that day shalt thou not be ashamed for all thy doings, wherein thou hast transgressed against me. Which means we have to come into the understanding that we've lost and to repent. For then will I take away out of the midst of thee them that rejoice in thy pride, and thou shalt no more be haughty because of my holy mountain. But I want to go down because I want you to read it, but I will not take the time here now to read it. Behold, verse 19, at that time I will undo all that afflict thee. For the Negro in the West, we were brought down into a cruel bondage, 400 years of bondage, of affliction through servitude in the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. The Bantu have suffered a similar indignity in the form of colonization. And continuing, and I will save her that halteth, and gather her that was driven out, and I will get them praise and fame in every land where they have been put to shame. So we, the Negro and the Bantu people, are still at the bottom rung of every ladder where we've been scattered. But he is going to give us praise and fame in every land where we have been put to shame. Verse 20, at that time will I bring you again, even in the time that I gather you, for I will make you a name and a praise among all people of the earth. Among all people of the earth, when I turn back your captivity before your eyes, saith Yahweh. So, what is the title of the talk? Redefining Armageddon. How do they define Armageddon? Let me go to where uh, that definition is given by Google. So this is the understanding that is obviously now out there in the world as to what Armageddon means. In the New Testament, the last battle between good and evil before the day of judgment. This is how it is defined in the popular understanding and imagination. Let me ask, what is the literal meaning of Armageddon? It says the word is a Greek transliteration of the Hebrew Har Megiddo. Har means a mountain or range of hills. Right. Megiddo refers to a fortification made by King Ahab that dominated the plain of Jezreel. Its name means place of crowds. No, no. And who am I to say no to these, those who here write the dictionaries and would be the experts on which we should rely? Or let me put that in landscape mode so that you could better read it. Oh boy, this handheld device is so slow. Please forgive me my technological inadequacy here. Well, it's not even going to turn. All right. Well, if you don't want to turn, I won't fight you. So, what are we warned? Because Scripture lets us to know what is going to happen. Who am I to argue with these supposed experts that are telling us what Hebrew means? And the so-called Jews have taken that upon themselves to be the sort of, the sort of final word as to Hebrew. They claim to have preserved the ancient Hebrew, but I have proven, I would say beyond a doubt, in the book, chapter 2 and chapter 3 of the coming of David Messiah, that they have deliberately left out inconvenient consonants. They left out that consonant ga, which is how we would know where the word nega comes from and its meaning, and replace it with a consonant ayin, depicted by an I, which they say has no, it is silent. So that if you try to figure out where the word Negro comes from and its cognate word nega, you're never going to be able to find it. And that was deliberate. And similarly, they have left out altogether. In the case of Ga, they simply redefined it. In the case of the consonant Gya, which is depicted by a wick, a twisted wick, which is what depicts the idea in the abstract of a wicked, twisted thing destined to be burned. Okay, and it's the sort of root consonant of the word that came in English as Gentile. And the relevant prefix there is Gien, which literally means son of the wicked, from where we get the word Gentile. You understand? So they have been fooling around with our language. So we should not rely upon them for our understanding of key words in our language. So this is in part the sense in which I use the title of this talk, Redefining Armageddon. So in the narrow, I will explain it and have explained it because in the previous talk, the word Armageddon, I was well able to break down into a three-part word, Har Armageddedi. Har is mountain in the literal. It is power in the abstract. Ama is a collective. So the people of. And Gededi is that suffix which is qualified by the Amma, so the people of Gededi, the Gededi people is Armageddon. That's what it is signified. And Gededi, I can further break down as meaning the watched over David, where that ge sound derives from the consonant ga, which they redefine in the modern Hebrew to ayin, and they say is silent. And then the dedi part is simply dal dal, which is referencing David, whose name was Deod. Okay, in when vocalized, how it was vocalized back then. But they have given us now this definition, which is not self-defining the way it is brought into the King James Bible. It is just there. But if you know the Paleo Hebrew, which is the original language of the garden, then it is a word that defines itself, isn't it? Especially if you have spirit to guide you in that meaning, using Urim, as he has guided me. But they and they brought that meaning into the popular imagination, that final battle of good and evil, or between good and evil, before the day of judgment. That is what now we understand the word Armageddon to mean. But what it really means is the power of the people of King David. So there is at the same time a war of Armageddon, and also, yes, there is a battle of Armageddon. So I'll come to the war of Armageddon in a minute and distinguish it from that specific battle that is their reference in Revelation 16 and 16. But before I do that, let me get back now to what it says in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 19. O Yahweh, my strength and my fortress and my refuge in the day of affliction, the Gentiles, this means the sons of the wicked, that's why they're the synagogue of Satan, because it's the same. Okay. And I dealt with that in an earlier upload, where it's a reference also to Gog and Magog, because Magog is Omogog or Amagog, which is indicating that he is from Gog, and Gog is that fallen angel prince. And if he's a fallen angel, then straight away he's wicked, and straight away he lines up with Satan. You understand? And this is what he is the one, that polluted the line of Japheth, to where now it was no longer called the Isles of Japheth, where Japheth's people went. It became known as the Isles of the Gentiles, the Isles of the sons of the wicked. Anyway, so the Gentiles shall come unto thee from the ends of the earth, and shall say, surely our fathers have inherited lies. I didn't write it. I'm reading it. Vanity, and things wherein there is no profit. Shall a man make gods unto himself, and they are no gods? And let me read 21. I don't usually, but let me read it on this occasion. Therefore, behold, I will this once cause them to know. I will cause them to know mine hand and my might, and they shall know that my name is Yahweh. So his name is important. His name is important, and I may not put a pin right there because I have to come back to the point I'm going to make. But let me do a little digression. In Psalm 91, I believe it is, go down to verse 14. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high. Why? Because he hath known my name. I didn't write it. And it's there in the third commandment, thou shalt not take the name of thy God to be a vain or a light thing. Verse 15, he shall call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. So it is that the Gentiles, who are also the ones who are committing a blasphemy by saying they are of the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah, when in fact they are not, who have taken upon themselves to mess with our language, and in messing with our language, redefining the terms of our language, and in particular redefining Armageddon. So let's now go to the distinction between the war of Armageddon and the battle of Armageddon. And what is the war of Armageddon? And that was the subject of the previous upload, entitled Armageddon versus Esau, which I think we can sort of encapsulate in Psalms 83. And let me start at verse 1. Keep not thou silence, O Eloah. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O Eloah. Verse 2. For lo, thine enemies, I didn't write it, I'm reading it, the enemies of the Most High, make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. Verse 3. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. And this is now the war of Armageddon. Verse 4. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel, Iye Sharalo, may be no more in remembrance. Verse 5. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites of Moab and the Hagarenes. I didn't write this. So if you're an Ishmaelite, don't get mad at me. Verse 7, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Ashur also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, who of course Moab and Ammon. Selah. So this is the war. They have taken, what is it, crafty counsel. What is that? That is a reference to working with Satan. That's a satanic pact. References to witchcraft, essentially. Okay. Now, whether through craft they have put us asleep, or whether it is Most High Himself who put us asleep, becomes a question that is neither here nor there. But in fact, we have been put to sleep to the extent that, verse 4, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. Because you talk about, Negro and Bantu people being the children of Israel, you will get the most argument from people who are themselves Negro and Bantu. And obviously, why? Because the others are wise, they're hip to this confederacy. White supremacy is an essential arm of that war against Armageddon. War against Armageddon, now define it. Har Armageddon, war against the power of the people of King David. That's what the war of Armageddon really is. It's a war against the rise of the Negro and the Bantu people and their brethren who were scattered all over the world, because we were scattered all over the world. And that we know from the book of 2nd Ezra, chapter 13, verses 40 to 45, which says, and again I didn't write it, this was at the time of the Assyrian invasion, and the northern tribes were scattered into lands where never before mankind dwelt. And that's why the Negro, or well, it's called the Negro, also called Bantu in Africa, not so much around the world, but we are the same people. We are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, the northern tribes were the first to go around 620 BC. And then there was another scattering around 720. The northern tribes went off around 722 BC under the Assyrian invasion. And then again at the time of the first Babylon invasion around 606 or so BC. And then there was another scattering in 70 AD, which that book by Rudolph Windsor, From Babylon to Timbuktu, I think it's called, sort of went into in some detail as to the various scatterings. But the point is, based on 2nd Ezra, chapter 13, that passage from about verse 40 to 45, I should bring it up here, but well, let me not try to do that. It says, we were scattered into lands where never before mankind dwelt. That's how we became the aboriginal people of so many different places on the earth. From the Americas in the west down to far South Pacific in the east. So those people there in Fiji are our people. They didn't come out of Africa. They were there because the ones in Fiji and guided are descended from Reuben. They're the tribe of Reuben. The ones that made it down, and they even kept, some of their Hebrew names. Hawaii, Hawa is a reference to the Most High. So the Hawaii people are the people of the Most High. That's what that is saying. And then in Americas, for example, there's a tribe there that gave its name to the state of Massachusetts. They call the Mosevatuset people. So where the Mose in that is referencing Moses, people of Moses. And then down in New Zealand, the Maori people are the Ama-Ur people. Ur meaning, the light, meaning the east, because that's where the sun came up. So Ama-Ur means the people of the east. That's essentially what that means. The Hebrew is there. The Maya people there in Central America, again, that construct is there, the Amaya people. Okay, the Amaiye, the people of God, that's what that means. You understand? Okay, the Arawak people, there's I forget it now offhand, the top of my head. But when you examine that term, that too is Hebrew. Haiti is actually Ayiti, but even that is a corruption of the original name for that island, which was Ieti. You understand? But Iye is there in the name. This land I'm from here, and in which I was born in Trinidad, its original name was Iyere, which is straight up Hebrew word. Okay. When you look at the name for what I call the Caribs, They also call the Kalinago people. Well, Carib is actually Caribi or Cariba. And in many of our languages, the letter R and the letter L are kind of mixed up. The same way the Chinese and the Koreans tend to mix it up. So Caribi could also be Calibi, Caliba. You understand? And Nago is a reference to that nigger because the Yoruba people also call themselves the Nago people, which is another way of saying the people of the king, King David. That's the reference. So Kali Nago is actually not saying that they're people of the king. It's saying that they are closely related. Like we would in the Caribbean here is called it pumpkin vine relation. In other words, they're married into it. They're not themselves of the bloodline because the Kali Nago people actually are paternally of a Mongolian descent. But they mixed in with the Israelite females that they found. Because when they came, they were the part of their project was essentially they killed off the Arawak, who were there first, who were paternal line. Go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, so they killed the men and they married the women, kind of situation. I mean, it's obviously, well, I'll leave it as stark as that. So Kali Nago is another way of saying Carib or Caribi or Calibi or Caliba, which, by the way, is what is there in that Shakespearean novel, The Tempest, where one of the antagonists was called Caliban. Caliban versus Prospero. But those who know Shakespeare and literature can go look into that. But that's where the word Carib comes from, and its cognate word Kalinago. So we were there as Aboriginal people in all of these various lands, including Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, and wherever, and this is now the war of Armageddon, wherever the Armageddon people went, those who are confederate against us were not long to follow. So Edom eventually came, and there was a war. And it was essentially a war of genocide. In Western Europe, it was called the War of Albion, meaning the white ones, versus Niger, meaning the Armageddon. And we were known by other names as well. The word Druid is cognate to Dedi. So Druid is adverting to the root of King David, the tribal root, which is exactly what the word Negro does. Negro is adverting to the tribal root of the Nega. The Nega meaning the watched over one, the apple of God's eye, and that was a praise title for David. So Negro and Druid actually have the same reference and the same essential meaning. And when you look at the words, the word Kabbalah, and I've given breakdowns of these, some of it in the book, some of it is not in the book, but in various uploads. The word Kabbalah was actually Gawalat in our language. So those who are the ones that have tried to usurp our identity because of the letters that they didn't want there present, Ga. They didn't want that letter there at all. Because it's the same letter that's there with Nega, and therefore Negro. So they didn't want that referencing our noble past as associated with King David. They didn't want that letter there. So they changed that to Ka. And they even changed it to made it Kabbalah instead of what it was originally, which is Gawalat. And it's from Gawalat that we get the name Celt. The Celtic people who were there originally, the Aboriginal people of the British Isles of Western Europe. They were Celts and they were Gauls. Gawalat also comes from that same word, Gawalat. So Gawalat is that idea of reyoking to the Creator and keeping His law, which we were not keeping in the inheritance land. And so when they went to these promised lands, they made a pact among themselves to keep that law that they were not keeping in the inheritance land, which was why we got kicked out. So they were called according to that. They were called Gauls and they were or Gawals, and they were called Celts. And they were our people. The Druids were our people. Stonehenge was done by our people. But then when, under the dictates of Psalms 83, under whatever compulsions they were under to wage this war of Armageddon against us, the tabernacles of Edom and Ishmael and Moab and Ammon and so forth, but mostly Edom, came, and they had in many respects turned white because they mixed in with Gog and Magog people. Okay? And so it ramified as a sort of a skin color war or a race war in that sense, of a war between Albion, the white-skinned ones, versus Niger, who were invariably of a dark skin. So that's how Niger came to mean a reference to a skin color. But it wasn't there in the original meaning at all. It was a reference to a tribal a line of descent. That's what the original meaning was, in the fundamental meaning. Incidentally, also, it carried a connotation as to a dark skin color because we were dark skinned people. But the point is, in this war now of Esau against Jacob, that is prefigured already in the blessings that were given separately to Jacob and to Esau. Both were given the dominion. But Esau had now to come and take the dominion by the sword. You understand? Using craft, using crafty counsel, using guile, using cunning. So in large part it was a genocidal war to where now Western Europe became more Edomite than Jacobite, which is how it started. You understand? And this is part now of is continuing that sort of momentum of white supremacy, assertion of the dominion of Edomites over the Jacobites. That's how come Western Europe continued to nurse a kind of a disdain or a hatred for the Russian people and the people of the East, the Slavs and the Serbs. You understand? And so today it is ramifying into what is there in the reference to the battle of Armageddon, which is this one here, the singular occurrence of the word Armageddon in the so-called Bible. In verse 16 of Revelation chapter 16, and he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. So it's a place, but it's also an idea. The idea is the horn, the power of the Armageddon people. And that horn, that power now rests with Joseph, the house of Joseph, which is Russia, in terms of its ability to fulfill the destruction that is prophesied that would take place upon Esau in the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 18. So it is a place because it is Russia. And he's bringing them against Russia. And that is now the battle of Armageddon, a kind of a culminative battle when finally it is going to be a defeat of the forces of the tabernacles of Edom, Ishmael, Moab, and Ammon, and etc., who have been waging a war of Armageddon against the people of King David. Go back to the very beginning. Certainly going back to 606 BC, when the first kingdom of the Gentiles, Babylon, laid siege upon Zion, laid siege upon Jerusalem. Well, guess what? And this is now when Esau basically took the dominion. You understand? And in accordance with the prophecies that have been was led to refer to in the very first upload on this channel, exactly 2625 years later, and it's prophesied in the book of Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, 1290 days, and then the 1335 days, which when you work it out numerologically, there's 144 that come, 12 by 12 comes into it, which is referencing the 144,000. So 2625 years later, 1290 plus 1335, which brings us to the day, to December 31st, 2021, is when Zion laid siege against Babylon, reversing what had happened 2625 years later. So that, and I was given that on the third day of the new year, 6008, which was March 25th, 2022, is when Babylon is fallen, is fallen. That prophecy of Revelation chapter 18, verse 2, that was fulfilled. So that in the spiritual, Esau's dominion came to an end. So what was happening? What was happening is, let's go to the book of Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, which is Israel, which is the Armageddon, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. And this was the delusion that they entertained and have entertained these past many hundreds of years, indeed thousands. In the case of the Catholic Church, after the donation of Constantine 325 AD, Esau would have taken over that church. And when they changed times and laws, so instead of keeping the feast that the Most High gave Jacob to keep, oh no, they were not doing that. They brought in Easter, they brought in Christmas, they brought in whatever other pagan feasts. They called Yeshua the Messiah when he himself said he was not. And guess what? The more they lied, the more they changed these times and laws. Okay, the more powerful seemingly they became because their writ went all over the world. And people submitted themselves to his power and his authority. So what was one of the titles of the Pope? The Vicar of Christ, is it not? But here's what it says. And they shall be given into his hand. Why? Because Most High, when he makes a covenant, he keeps the covenant. Even though you are wicked in how you exercise that, in this case, the dominion, he made a covenant through Isaac, under which the covenant shall be taken at some point by Esau, which he did. So if Esau is given the dominion, then Esau's word became law. So simple as that. Even though he was going against the Most High. As we see there in Psalms 83, where it says straight up that these who were confederate against us, Jacob's people, were also enemies of the Most High. But the popes of Rome took that to be confirmation that they were essentially like gods on earth. That's what that was. Not recognizing or somehow forgetting that it says here, until a time, and times and the dividing of time. So a limit was set. And that limit has now, certainly in the spiritual, it's over, it's done, it's finished. And now it's only working itself out in the physical as to how indeed they shall be brought down. And it's said in the book of Revelation somewhere that church will be brought down. But they're still acting as though they're all high and mighty. They repudiated the doctrine of discovery, sort of with the implication being that institution is somehow distanced from that wickedness that was done in its name. And that institution could somehow remain and survive. No, it's not going to remain and it's not going to survive. That's why in the very first upload on this site, it was an audio letter of demand. It wasn't begging them to rescind. It wasn't begging them to repudiate. It was making a demand upon everything that they own. All of what is theirs, because they never had the authority to be any vicar of Christ on earth. All they got was a dominion. And so all what they got was based on a false premise that the earth was theirs to rule as they liked. Well, that was true, but only in the sense of a dominion that was limited in the extent of time that was granted to it. So the only difference in making that letter of demand, it was either they accept the demand and if in effect give over that which was demanded, or they reject the demand. Well, they rejected the demand because they never replied to it. Which means that now, demand having been made, demand having been rejected, he that is really in charge, who is Yahweh, and it was made in his name, and I had to put it in his name. Couldn't put it in my own name. Who am I? So the only thing now is how that transfer of power, that transfer of authority, how it is going to be brought about, and with what sort of hammer will be brought to bear. We already see the what we just read in Zephaniah chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, that we who were despised by the whole world will now see us in a different light. And in Revelation chapter 3, verse 9, this pertains not to the Vatican, but to the so-called Jews. We shall make them to come and worship before our feet. So all what they're doing now, as we wake up, they're sending out their rabbis as though they are the ones who have the authority to proclaim, well, yes, the Igbos are Jews, and yes, the Falash over there in Ethiopia are Jews, and yes, those other ones over there are Jews, and these ones over here are also Jews. They have no authority to say any of that because they are imposters. Quite simple. That's why there was also a letter of demand made to the state of Israel. They also must hand back all that which they have taken while professing to be that which they are not. And in professing to be that which they are not, they were committing and are still committing a blasphemy. And I dealt with that in an earlier upload on forgivable and unforgivable sins. Why is it that blasphemy against the Holy Ghost is the only unforgivable sin? I addressed that question. And why is it a blasphemy in the first place? You understand? I'm not going to go over that here now. But the point is that they are in no position of authority to be the ones to be any arbiter. So who is a Jew and who is not a Jew, because they are not themselves Jews in the sense that that term we are supposed to take to mean, meaning of the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. They're not. And we who are the Negro and the Bantu people of the world, plus our brethren who are cast wide and far, like those in Fiji, like those in Hawaii, and so forth, we are the ones who are the bloodline. And we are the ones who are now being awakened to who we are. And we are the ones having suffered the indignities of colonization and servitude will now be raised up in the eyes of the world. That is what is going on. So, the war of Armageddon, when we go back to the original meaning, which we can get when we apply Zephaniah 3 and 9, and return to the people of pure language, going back to the Paleo-Hebrew, which is a pictographic language, and that is how you can derive meaning, even if it's not sort of defined within the scriptural word as it's given. If Armageddon occurs only once in the Bible, there's no way to define it, except to go to that Paleo-Hebrew definition and the pictographs that were there in the beginning. That's how we can define the meaning or draw meaning out of it. And that was the original language of the garden. And in the same way that language was taught again to Abraham, and why it was he was then surnamed the Hebrew, having been the first after that original language was lost at the Tower of Babel. Having been the first now to reclaim that language, he became the Hebrew. He became surnamed the Hebrew. And so we who are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob inherit that surname of the Hebrew. That's why we are the Hebrew Israelites. Not because of Eber in his line, in Abraham's line going back up to Shem, but because he was the one through whom that language of the garden was brought back. And if the Most High could bring it back one time for Abraham, he could bring it back again to his people. And in particular, his people that still speak a kind of a daughter language of Paleo Hebrew. Now, it is a project that is underway. I make no claim to have brought back the entirety of the ancient Hebrew language, by no means. But we have to start somewhere. And we start with the most important words. And those most important words are the words specifically that they try to hide its true meaning. So this is a sense of redefining Armageddon in that broader sense. Redefining the language in that broader sense, which is what they have done as part of that Psalms 83 project, which is that larger war against Armageddon to make us forget who we were. That the name of Israel be no more in remembrance. And that's why Negro and Bantu people today are the ones that would fight you hardest when you say, look, we are the children of Israel. They will fight you down. Others will more quickly accept that because they knew it to be true. Otherwise, they had no reason to be waging this war against Armageddon. And now it is coming to this final sort of, if you like, climactic battle of Armageddon, which is where the forces of Esau, in its highest sort of, manifestation, U.S., the current hegemon, along with its vassals or allies, whichever way you want to take it, the EU, the UK, and this organization they call NATO, they are now flinging themselves. They hardly even know why. They don't even know that they're doing that pursuant to Psalms 83. That's why in the book of Ezekiel chapter 39 verse 3, the Most High says he will cause them to go against the mountains of Israel. Well, the mountains of Israel is just Har Armageddon in the person of Russia. Because Russia itself has been raised as a huge power, an underestimated power by the forces of Esau and those allied with Esau, Gog and Magog and Babylon, the daughter of Babylon, and whichever other term that is used for them, and will come a cropper upon the mountains of Israel in that sense. And indeed, there's a great feast that is called upon those mountains, feast of the birds and of the beasts of the field, because of the extent of the carnage which we're already witnessing. Just recently I heard some report to the effect that the casualty count on the Ukrainian side alone of that battle waged upon the mountains of Israel, upon Armageddon, in other words, is up to 1 million already, or close to 1 million. With a nod here and a thanks to the one posting a smoothie X12, who is a Russian by descent living in America, who is a military, naval, and geopolitical kind of expert. And he did a calculation that is, in terms of killed, is about 360,000, I think was the figure he came up with. And when you do the usual sort of multiplier to figure out the casualties, it will be close to 1 million. Multiply it by about 3 or so, 1 million casualties. And that is more than all of what the United States suffered during all of the Second World War. To give you a sense of the scale of the carnage. And that is what is there prophesied in Revelation chapter 19, verse 18, which the Most High also had me to point towards in that audio letter of demand, the very first one, um, as having been fulfilled in the spiritual on April 5th, which was Passover last year. And after US, UK, NATO rejected the peace that had been negotiated by the parties, Ukraine and Russia, had sat down under the sort of auspices of President Erdogan of Turkey. They sent Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of UK at the time, to scuttle that settlement, that proposal, or that peace deal, and encouraged Ukraine, President Zelensky, to keep on fighting. And that happened on April the 1st, 4 days before the Passover. So as of the Passover was when that deal was sealed, that you would have this mountain, the carnage would be so great, this mountain of flesh carcasses upon which the birds of the air and the beasts of the field could feast. So that was fulfilled in the spiritual April 5th Passover last year, and it's now been since April 5th. It's been, that war has turned into a meat grinder, and so it is fulfilled now also in the physical. And also have been given to make the point as to the book of Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 in particular, 70 weeks are determined, among others, to make reconciliation for iniquity and to anoint the most holy. So this is how Zion is being restored. And as part of how Zion is, and by the way, the 70 weeks is essentially 70 Shabuas, 70 of those 7-week periods that occurs on the Hebrew calendar every year from the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the Feast of Pentecost. Okay, so that is a multi-barrel prophecy. And there's a countdown for the state of Israel, which started in 1951, following the Sharafat massacre. There's a 70-year countdown in effect for Britain, when it started in 1952, when Elizabeth acceded to the throne. That would have expired last year, 2022. And then, as of August 1953, another countdown started when the United States went into Iran and brought down Prime Minister Mossadegh. So that would have, the next Shabua after August 53 would have been actually around April or so, starting around April or so, 1954. So that 70 Shabua countdown would end next year, 2024. And this applies to the United States. So all of the kind of wickedness that they have been doing to take advantage of smaller and weaker states, such as Iran, their time is up. Okay, indeed, I think the time is already up, but in terms of the time given for reconciliation to be made for iniquity, which is a kind of reparations. But it is not reparations where, the sort of state of things remain as they are after reparations is paid. No, because they will no longer be in charge. They no longer have the dominion. That dominion has slipped away from them. And it is, like everything else, it takes time after having been sealed in the spiritual. For it now to fully work itself out in the spiritual will take some time. And the same applies to Israel. We see Israel going into a kind of an anarchy. They can't even get their pilots to go up to train. They have what is getting close to civil war in that land, right? And we have the Catholic Church sort of acting as though they're still very much large and in charge, and could make a statement of repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, which sort of distances themselves from having been involved. Whereas if you a doctrine of discovery really is not the crux of the issue either. Crux of the issue goes back to that first papal bull of Pope Nicholas V, under which he gave power, permission, authority to the Catholic kings of Spain and Portugal to go into these new lands, sort of opened up by Columbus. I would not say discovered by Columbus, because there were people there already. Okay? But to go to those lands and to reduce to perpetual servitude those people there, the Saracens and the pagans. And of course, you can now look into how you define Saracens and pagans. You do a determined search on what a Saracen would look like. What comes up is the image of a Negro. You understand? And pagan, I suppose, is one of those terms. We could go into the definition as to what really it means, but I won't do that here now. But the point is to reduce to perpetual servitude. That was doctrine. They can't escape from that. They cannot say that was not part of the Catholic faith. That was a papal bull. So it's not that they could repudiate it. No. If they issued such a bull under correct and lawful authority, then the proper thing is to rescind that, because that papal bull was entitled Dum Diversas, which means until otherwise decreed. So all they have to say is, well, okay, we now otherwise decree that is now over. Okay? It wouldn't even disturb the doctrine of papal infallibility. Because as part of the papal infallibility doctrine, if you say until otherwise decreed, that means as that lawful king with the authority to give a decree, and in stating that decree you say until otherwise decreed, then you allow the opening up of that gap now without disturbing the claimed infallibility to now rescind the earlier decree, or to say, well, okay, that earlier decree is now expired without indeed touching the doctrine of infallibility. But they tried to sort of, distance themselves and call it not a rescission, but rather a repudiation. But in any case, it all doesn't matter because their time is up. And as an institution, they will be brought down because they have no right to be claiming these offices. In any case, priesthood is not a right. It's an office that is restricted. And under the covenant law, it was an office restricted to the Levites, at least under the Aaronic priesthood. I am a priest, but I'm not an Aaronic priest. I'm a priest after the order of Melchizedek, which is the priesthood order of Yeshua. So that is my priestly office. But the priestly office is not open to any and everybody under the law. And this is what the Catholic Church and these other religions have sort of presumed upon themselves to think, well, they too can be priests. And there was an objection made about that in scripture that you will find. But all kinds of base people came into the priesthood. And the Most High, has not ordained, could even be eligible for priesthood. Understand? So all of what they have built up has to be brought down institutionally. And all of what, they have in terms of physical assets and etc. must be brought over and given over to the kingdom of Zion. For the kingdom of Zion to then do with it what it wants. That's how this is going to go down. And guess what? Not only is it that those who are calling themselves Jews, who are not Jews, in the sense that they would have us to believe they are, not only will they have to come and bow down at our feet, and I say that not out of any great pride, but because that is what is there in Scripture. And if it's there in Scripture, I better own it, because I can't claim to be more righteous than the Most High that caused that to be written. Not only will they have to come and bow down, but all those other Gentiles likewise. And that's there in Isaiah, I think, chapter 49. Let me bring it up. Let me bring it up. I think it's Isaiah 49. Around verse 23. Yes. Let me start at verse 22. Thus saith Yahweh, behold, I will lift up mine hand to the Gentiles, and set up my standard to the people. And they shall bring thy sons in their arms, and thy daughters shall be carried upon their shoulders. And verse 23, and kings shall be thy nursing fathers, and their queens thy nursing mothers. They shall bow down to thee with their face toward the earth, and lick up the dust of thy feet, and thou shalt know that I am Yahweh, for they shall not be ashamed that wait for me. And verse 24, shall the prey be taken from the mighty, or the lawful captive delivered? In other words, they can't get away from what the Most High has decreed. So still today, even as we can see the stirrings of the awakening of the Negro and Bantu people in specific, and all of the other um, Israelite people scattered around the earth, we are still looking, we are still looked upon as such a sort of a hapless people without army to defend the great resources that the Most High has given us. That continent there of Africa, okay, I think it is the richest of all the continents of the earth. And we are indeed a single people. If you go from West Africa, with a lot of Hamites mixed in, yes, from West Africa, say from about, including Mali certainly, and even Mauritania, south of the Sahel, all the way down to South Africa. Essentially, we are a single people, the Negro Bantu people, with a lot of Arabs mixed in, with a lot of Hamites mixed in, Nilotic people mixed in, which was part of what went on with that Rwanda genocide. Tutsi versus Hutu, both are Israelite people. The only difference is the amount of admixture of the Hamitic Nilotic seed line that is present, which is greater amongst the Tutsi than it was amongst the Hutu. That's all. Right. And the Belgians, I think, who were there could sort of exploit those differences, under the usual kind of imperatives of colonization, divide and rule. Very simple. And of course, we fell for that. But the whole of sub-Saharan Africa is essentially our people. And of course, we have the Boers down there in South Africa and the Anglos there who are still there in South Africa. And yes, they want to hold on to their privilege. Well, no, they also will have to do what is here written in Isaiah 49, verse 23. Lick up the dust of thy feet, and thou shalt know that I am Yahweh, for they shall not be ashamed that wait for me. So that's really where I want to end up. They redefined, in the narrow sense, they redefined Armageddon, but we can reclaim it using what is prophesied there in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, restoration of a pure language. So in that sort of narrow sense, um, uh, 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 we can undo the redefinition of our language in the broad, in the general, because it's not only the word Armageddon. They've taken so much of our language. And I'll just give one example, which has come up recently in discussions I've had with some people, where reference is made to Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 68. I don't know if I'll find a variation here where they can sort of take our, and it was verse 68, and we have how it's done in the King James. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. There ye shall be sold unto your enemies. Well, there is a variation. I think it's a New King James. Let me see. Here it says, and there you shall be offered for sale. See, in the King James it said, there you shall be sold to your enemies. Here it says, you shall be offered for sale to your enemies, but no one will buy you, which means something entirely different. So here is just a simple example of where their control over our letters of our forefathers to us, they having control of that, they can take the word and now twist it to mean something very different from what it originally said. And there was another version of this, I forget which version it was, which says, and there you shall offer yourselves for sale, and no one shall buy you, which is completely different from what it was. It says in the original King James. You see, so this is a case of redefining the scripture itself and using their control over our letters to do that. Well, it is our job now to take back control of our letters. And we don't have to appeal to them for them to approve or to authorize or to even give an opinion as to what they think it should be. Because we cannot trust them. It's like handing your children over to your enemy to be educated. Makes no sense whatsoever. So with that, I will conclude by giving all praise to the Most High, God, Yahweh, whom I serve. And to all those still listening, I say, Shalom.